So it's a great pleasure to host here the Italian Institute on a Poetry Day. And just this image of Marina, remember me one friend of mine that long ago passed away, and the name of the friend is Federico Fellini, of course, a dear friend of mine. I don't know if I am a dear friend of him, but it's not matter. So he said, he said something very interesting. He said, money is everywhere, but so is poetry. What we lack are the poets themselves. So you will see and hear the poets themselves on this evening. And of course, it's impossible to start the evening and to introduce it without some poet. Some poet, she received a Nobel. Kריסטינה, she is not from Italy. She is even not from Russia. But she is the most famous poet in the world living right now. She is not living, not she herself is living, but her poets are living. So, okay, I will just say, some people like poetry. Some people, that means not everyone, not even most of them, only a few. Not counting school where you have to, and poets themselves. You might end up with something like 2 per 1,000. Like. But what does it mean to like? But then you can like chicken noodle soup, or compliments, or the color blue, or old scarf, or your dog. What does it mean to like? Poetry? But what is poetry anyway? So I hope that this evening my English sounded to me each time I'm speaking like Yiddish. I don't understand what I'm speaking myself, and it sounded to me like Yiddish. So I'll just finish with the words without the microphone, because the microphone is also making me some trouble. So have a nice evening, and I will finish with the words of Robert Frost and Brodsky. And they say something like that, because the evening is about translations of poetry. So Proust said that what is left after the translation is poetry, and Brodsky answered to him, and I think that he is right, what's gone away is poetry. So have a great evening. Thank you all for joining us, and now we will hear pieces of music that in some way remind me, and I hope will remind you of Italy, of all those beautiful things that have those countries. My English is terrible, Kריסטינה. I never more speak in English. I better speak in Yiddish. Guten Abend. Please.
Okay, so thank you so much to Yosef Kadosh and Guy Moscovich for the beautiful music. And buongiorno a tutte e tutti. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here today to celebrate World Poetry Day with you. A special thank you, of course, to Betta Riela and Yuli Shapira for their wonderful collaboration and hospitality once again. So this morning we will talk about poetry and many other topics with the Italian poet Federico Italiano and the Israeli poet Sivan Beskin. They will present their latest work and read some of their poems with us. So I welcome Federico Italiano, who is born in the city of Novara in northern Italy in 1976. After several years living in Germany, Munich, and in Austria, in Vienna, he now lives in Rome, where he teaches comparative literature at La Sapienza University. A poet and translator, he has published 5 poetry collections, and his poems have been translated in several languages, including German, English, and French. His last work is La Grande Nevicata, The Great Snowfall. So, Federico Italiano, welcome here. Sivan Beskin is a poet, translator, editor, literary critic, and even IT analyst. Born in Vilnius, Lithuania, in 1976, Beskin is a resident of Tel Aviv. She serves on the editorial board of O Literary Magazine and the 21st book series. Her 5th book, We, Homelandless, was published in 2024. So welcome to Sivan Beskin, and thank you for being here. So today's event is a journey through languages, English, Hebrew, and Italian. Our idea is to experience together how these different languages intertwine and blend. Probably, we have to admit, we will not understand everything, but we rather invite you to listen to the sounds of the languages you don't know, to embrace the gaps, the void, and even the moments of obscurity. So now we will listen to the poets. We will listen to 2 poems by Federico Italiano and Sivan Beskin in the original language and, when available, in their translated version. The poems of Federico Italiano have been translated by Jonathan Fine, and Italiano's translated poems will be read by Sivan Beskin and by Jonathan Fine. The poem Kaplan by Sivan Beskin has been translated by Jack Arbib. It will be read by Federico Italiano. On this journey through poetry, we will be accompanied by the beautiful music, as we have seen, of Yosef Kadosh and Guy Moscovich. But now I leave the floor to poetry, and we start with Federico Italiano poem.
Well, thank you very much, Cristina. Thank you very much to Betta Riela for this invitation. I'm very happy and honored to be here. And I don't want to lose time in other words, or with other words, than poetry. So I just start with the poem that gave the title to this collection of poems, La Grande Nevicata del 1985, which is a big event in history of Italy. I was a little child, and I remember very well that big snow that really changed somehow our perception of time and meteorology when we were children. And it was something like a very interesting event in the development of European history and world history, because it was the moment where, the Cold War was slowly coming to an end. So, micro-history and macro-history. La Grande Nevicata del 1985. La giacca a vento rossa con le piume d'oca, che a volte sbucavano dal poliestere come tarme dai loro nascondigli, i mombut antracite, i sogni d'allunaggio nel calzarli, il lampadario della sala che già alle 3 di pomeriggio faceva concorrenza al lampione della piazza. Ogni cosa più lenta, pacificata, marmorea. La neve ancora candida sui tetti, tanta, ammonticchiata ovunque su transenne, piloni, balaustre, lungo ogni muro, così tanta che in cortile costruimmo una rampa più alta di Karim Abdul-Jabbar, un monte bianco da cui scivolare fino al cancello, prima su sacchetti di plastica e inverosimili slitte, poi in un bob nuovo fiammante, rosso Ferrari il guscio, nere le lunghe leve dei freni. La gravità era strumento del piacere, i gemiti della neve, il crepitare del ghiaccio, gli effetti collaterali dell'appagamento. Con guance rosse, spilli di freddo nelle mani, la sciarpetta di lana grezza che incendiava il collo, ci lanciavamo dal centro della nostra Via Lattea, ai confini del cortile, dentro il bianco inesauribile di quel gennaio, un sibilo, 4 secondi, un secolo, fine dell'era glaciale, inizio del fango.
And in the same poem in Hebrew, השלג, שומעים? Is it heard? No. No? אוקיי, שומעים? השלג הגדול של 1985, תרגום יונתן פיין. מעיל רוח אדום עם נוצות אבז, שמדי פעם מגיחות מהפוליאסטר, כמו אש ממקום מסתור, מונבוץ, שחורות פחם וחלומות, הנחיתה על הירח, הצפונים בהם הנברשת בפרוזדור, שכבר ב3 בצהריים התחרתה בתאורת הפיאצה. הכל כמו הועט, נעשה שלב כעשוי שיש, השלג עדיין צח על הגגות, שלג רב, נערם בכל מקום, על גדרות, עמודים, מעקות לאורך כל קיר, שלג כה רב, שבנינו בחצר רמפה, גבוהה יותר מכרים אבדול-ג'בר, הר לבן להחליק עליו. עד לשער, תחילה של שקיות, פלסטיק ומזחלות דמה, אז מזחלת חדשה ולוהבת, הגוף אדום פרארי, ידיעות ההילוכים שחורות, כוח המשיכה היה אמצעי להסבת עונג, הנחות השלג, חריקות פצפוץ הקרח, נזק היקפי של רגע המימוש. בלחיים סמוקות, מדקרות קור בידיים בצעיף צמר גס שהבעיר את הצוואר, זינקנו מלב שביל לחלב עד לגבולות החצר, בלובן הלא נגמר של אותו ינואר, קול מהוסה, 4 שניות, 100, עד קצה עידן הקרח, עד פתח קו הבוץ.
Sounds wonderful, Jonathan. Thank you very much.
It does. So I'll proceed with my own poem. I was really excited that that was the first time that my poem was translated into Italian. It's called The Kaplan. It was written 2 years ago during the first protests. באביב הזה קפלן תמיד נראה כמו אחרי גשם, והאספלט היבש חלקלק כמו אחרי גשם, ושלט הניאון בוהק כמו קשת אחרי גשם, והמגדלים סביב מתרוממים כמו פטריות ענק אחרי גשם, ואם יורד גשם הוא נראה כמו אחרי גשם. אנחנו נרטבים ואיננו רטובים, כי זה הגשם אחרי גשם. ואם שעת בוקר בהירה, השמש נוצצת כוכב בחושך אחרי גשם. ונשימותינו נופלות מלמעלה כמו הטיפות אחרי גשם. וצעקותינו עולות כמו עדי האדמה אחרי גשם. ועומדים כמו אורנים אדומים אחרי גשם. ושרף החופש מר בגרוננו כמו אחרי גשם. ומריחים את הדם העתידי שישפך לרגלינו כמו מחטים אחרי גשם. ומאחורינו ים, כל המלח שנשאר אחרי גשם. תל אביב, 5 באפריל 2023.
Ora leggerò la traduzione in italiano di Jack Habib da questa poesia di סיון dal titolo Kaplan. In questa primavera Kaplan appare sempre come dopo la pioggia e l'asfalto asciutto è levigato come dopo la pioggia e l'insegna fluorescente splende come un arcobaleno dopo la pioggia e le torri intorno si ergono come funghi giganti dopo la pioggia e se piove la pioggia sembra come dopo la pioggia. Non ci bagniamo ma non siamo umidi perché è questa pioggia che è dopo la pioggia e se l'ora mattutina è chiara il sole splende come una stella nel buio dopo la pioggia e i nostri respiri calano dall'alto come le gocce dopo la pioggia e i nostri gridi si elevano come vapori dalla terra dopo la pioggia e ritti come abeti rossi dopo la pioggia e la resina della libertà è aspra nelle nostre gole dopo la pioggia e odoriamo il sangue amaro versato ai nostri piedi come aghi dopo la pioggia e dietro di noi il mare, tutto il sale che resta dopo la pioggia. Tel Aviv, 5 aprile 2023. I was talking in Italian, but I didn't realize it was a translation by Jacobib. Now I read a poem, Pietra Pomice, and Jonathan Fine will later read the translation. It is a very short poem, which has to do with a very long strand in the northern of Sicily. Those are my two familiar landscapes, Piedmont and Milan, where I was born and where I grew up, and in summer, especially when I was a child, northern coast of Sicily, where my father came from, and my grandparents still had a home almost directly in the seaside. So it was very typical for us to spend July and August on the seashore and to see this kind of stone coming to us, floating on the water. It was like a miracle. Pietra Pomice. Lunga un'estate la spiaggia ha 18, dal capo di Milazzo fino a Tindari. Anni 80, mio padre che si abbronza e cambia accento. Ci viene incontro galleggiando, argentea come un'offerta, leggera sull'acqua come un miraggio, robusta e porosa come un enigma, nuotatrice portentosa, miracolo acquatico che merita un Vangelo, ruvida spuma di vetro vulcanico, figlia del magma, perdona il nostro affronto, l'ordinario bagagliaio di un Audi, l'autostrada rovente, l'infamia sulla ceramica bianca del bagno.
באיטלקית זה נשמע יותר טוב. אבן ספוג. קיץ בחוף זרוע חלוקי אבן. מקאפו די מילאצו עד טינדרי. שנות ה-80, אבי שמשתזף ומחליף מבטא. את מגיעה בציפה, כסופה כמו מנחה, קלה על המים כמו תעתוע, קשה ונקבובית כמו חידה. שחיינית מהפנטת, נס ימי שראוי לבשורה. קצף גס של זכוכית וולקנית, ביטה של המגמה. מחלי לנו על האלבון, בגז של אאודי, אוטוסטרדה לוהטת, חרפת הקרמיקה הלבנה על שפת האמבטיה.
והשיר הבא, the next poem I'm going to read only in Hebrew because it was not translated into Italian, is the first poem I managed to write after October 7th. And, you know, first everybody was so shocked that it was almost impossible to write And I had to solve somehow this inability to write. And then I thought that, Yiddish poets were doing their job in more difficult circumstances. And so I have no excuse to write. And those days, Yiddish poetry was supporting me so much emotionally. So the poem I'm going to read, that was written in December 2023, is totally based on the pattern of the famous Yiddish song, Es brennt, known also in Hebrew as Refachim Srefa. I heard some sort of post-punk cover of this song, and this music and its stanza structure helped me to write, to express what I had to express at that point. So it's called Zorem, sort of a tribute to Es brennt, phonetically. זורם, שווסטרלך, זורם, ברזל מותח, אבק בטון זורם, ברחובות ובברידנו, החמצן כמעט איננו, הגרון חסום באבן, אף אחד לא נושם. כל החי עומד בהלם מול מכת דומם, והחי עומד בהלם, הדומם זורם. הו כן, מהים עד הירדן, מהים עד הירדן איש לא ישן, לא אדם, לא עץ, לא כלב, לא גמל טיפש בנגב, אין מלטונין בארץ, אף אחד לא ישן. הצומח לא צומח, הדומם הולם, הצומח לא קופח, גם לא מתחמם. שומם, יבוא מדבר שומם, רצח, 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 ומדבר שומם. אבן נייר ומספריים יחסמו את עין המים, במקום בו יום ולילה אף אחד לא חולם. ארץ, עיר, בן, בת, מקצוע, חלק ושלם, בואו לדמם מנוע דלק מדמם. אור אין, רק הים קורן, רק הים נוצץ בשמש וקורן. ים אביא כל תא ורחם, כל שרשרת מתארכת. ים אל תעזוב אותנו, אונזר שטטל ברנט. ים אביא תנועה ונצח, יודע כל סטודנט. אל תנטוש כשלעיניך אונזר שטטל ברנט. תל אביב, 16 בדצמבר 2023.
So, thank you so much for these readings. Now we call again our musicians to the stage for a second part with their beautiful music. We will listen to Love Theme from Il Padrino and Deborah Theme from C'era una volta in America. Thank you once again. Thank you. So I find it so beautiful to talk now after this music about your works, your poems. So first of all, I'd like to start with your latest books from which the poems we have read before were taken. And what I noticed reading your works is that, first of all, there are a few similarities. You both are deeply connected to geography, to mapping cities. We could draw cartographies and maps, probably, starting from your works. So let's start with you, Federico, and tell us about your work, your connection to different countries, different languages as well, and how everything comes from maybe your personal stories, your family memory as well. So tell us more about your work.
Yes, I think there was really a kind of hint within the two poems that I've read. And, the La Grande Nevicata, the big snow. You see also here in the photo, it's a very classic picture of Milano under the snow, and it was exactly in that year. It was this January 1985 when this big snow covered all northern Italy with almost 1 meter of snow, which was, in the Tyrian country, it was kind of peculiar. At the same time, as I told you, my father moved from Sicily to the north to study and he met my mother. So I was already, as a child, somehow divided into these two big zones of emotions, because I was kind of a guy, growing up in Piemonte, but knowing that I have something like a family over there, and which I met only in the summer. So there was this divide, and then I started to travel, and I've been working in Munich in Germany, in Vienna in Austria. So my poetry always reflected this kind of disorientation, which was for me a kind of way of living, and that is why probably I tried to map things, knowing that poetry always eludes map. So poetry cannot be confined to a map, fortunately, because it would be a horror if it would be possible. And that's the reason why I have so many cities, and also cities that I never met. Or there's a poem in this book where I talk about cities that I've never been to and just dreaming of them, or cities that I love very much, like Jerusalem or Vilnius, and so those are a part of my what I call geo-poetic, and I try to translate them into poetry to find this other dimension, and also, as Paul Celan would say, this meridian where I can live in a burning world, and poetry is something like that, to find this kind of orientation in the normal disorientation of life.
I had to borrow yours. Thank you. And Sivan, also in your work, we find bridges, for instance. Tel Aviv has such an important role in your poems, but also the title of your work is so significant, I think. Homeless. Homelandless. Thank you. Yeah. Would you like to tell us a bit more?
Sure. First of all, later on you'll hear the poem that gave its name to my last book, with the homelandless. And finally, that poem was not even written about any political context, unlike many others. It was written in a broader geographic context, which connects me to what Federico was describing right now. It was written during the COVID-19 times, when you couldn't go anywhere, not even within your own city, leave alone traveling abroad. And I felt that if I'm derived from the whole world, so I'm even derived from my own city. So so I don't have any place anymore. I only have the language, the time, which is language, right? We all became stripped of the space, left only with time and language. So that's what's it about. And yet, in the same time, I took this picture. This is Judith Bridge, right? Because Tel Aviv is very important to me. And this book started with some poem cycle about the bridges of Tel Aviv. So Tel Aviv doesn't even have a decent river, but it has lots of bridges over the Ayalon highway, which is, a very weak substitute for a normal river that great European cities have. And when we were working with my editor on the book, she suggested to break this cycle and put the bridges poems in different places within the book. So it created such a structure, like a spinal structure for the whole book, going from overall bridges of Tel Aviv from north to south. And in broader context, I really agree with what you said, Kристίνα, that geography and maps are so central in my work because, I'm a native of Vilnius, and growing up in Vilnius means that you're in such a funny, paradoxical way, means that you're such a hyper-European because you're living like on the edge of the Western world. You have to defend yourself from the Russians all the time and so on, sometimes from the other side as well. And so you're living, and Vilnius is called sometimes the most Italian city north of the Alps because of its architecture and the Catholic Church and so on. And so you always feel that you're within a map, you're within a broader Europe, a broader world. You have to define your place there. And after you leave it, even if you leave to Israel, which is home to me, you have to reflect over all of it even more. So hence, I think, such intense occupation with geography. You might need a mic.
Thank you. And Federico, would you like to... So I really liked what you said before about imagination. And what is the role of imagination in your work?
There's a big difference between, of course, imagining a story and, a fiction, and imagining poetry. It's a very fine line between what we know mostly as fiction, a novel, short story, and a poem. A poem can be narrative. I have a lot of narrative poems in this book and in other books of mine. But imagination for poetry is something else. It's really creating something that should have, a kind of concrete grasp on reality. Poetry is never completely fiction. That's the reason why we tend to differentiate between novel and poetry, or story. There's something like a pact you are doing with your reader. What you're telling is, yes, of course, you are creating something. It never existed before. It cannot really be mapped, but it grabs. It has a grasp on reality. It is attached to reality. It adheres to reality, and so the imagination is always part of this process of being part of a kind of reality. And it's I don't know if poetry can be honest, can be sincere, can be believable, but it's a way of say something which has to do with the real world. So I really love poets who are kind of big visionaries and have a lot of imagination. I love them very much, but I know that even in the most incredible imagination flight, there's a true attachment to the reality. And so it is for me. Even when I talk about cities that do not exist, these cities exist for me. There's a passage, a wonderful passage in Moby Dick by Herman Melville, talking about the village where Queequeg was born. No? Rokokovo. No? Melville writes, it is not down in any map. True places never are. So a true place is not down in any map. And so is the imagination for me. So it's something which is very real, very present, but not down in any map. So.
I see. And I already know that you are deeply connected to imagination, Sivan. Also in your relationship to Italy, because I know you are very fond of Italy and in particular of one city that also lived in your imagination for a long time.
Yes, so we were talking here about Rome, and I had I've been going a very long way back with Rome. It's one of the cities where I feel at home, even though I've never lived there, just visited for several times. But it goes much more backwards. Like when I was about 12, me and my best friend were somehow fell into deep interest for the ancient Rome. I know it's kind of crazy for the age of 12. And so we read lots of books. And then I somehow saw at home of another friend a beautiful book, like a tourist guidebook on Rome, which with color illustrations and very good text and everything. And it was in English, and so I was 12. I've been learning English for a couple of years by then, but I really wanted it, so I borrowed this book, and I translated it like with a dictionary, with all the architectural and historical terms and everything. I translated the entire book just in like 10 middle school notebooks, just for myself, just to keep it, because I had to give the book back afterwards. And of course, going to Rome back then in the 80s was like an impossible dream. You know, Lithuania was still under Soviet rule. The Iron Curtain was still in place, so you couldn't even imagine to go to Rome. And this was my way to keep it for myself. You know, I've been translating literature for many years now, and I don't think there is any translational achievement I'm proud of more than of that Rome guidebook at the age of 12. Just for myself, nobody else read it. So, and much later, when I was already in Israel and it was possible to travel already, it somehow never occurred to me that I could just catch a plane and go to Rome and just make it become a reality for me, not just a city of imagination and dreams and longings, theoretical longings. So, and eventually I went to Rome for the first time 20 years after I found that book, and I still went to places according to that book. It was so good that it was still good enough as a guidebook in my memory, because I didn't have it with me. So it was like meeting an old friend, even though it was my first time there. And so Italy and Rome in particular became very important to me. And, you know, maybe it is like the home of my imagination in a way.
I just wanted to add about places, and it's not only about geographical places. I mean, space and this spatial dimension is very broad and very complex. For example, I don't write a lot of love poems, but there's a love poem which is called something like complementi di luogo, something like adverbials of place. No? It's all this kind of erotic poem based on the where we did it, no? And it's or for example, there's a poem about the way we used to play the yeti at home and transforming our house when we were children. There's a lot of poems about my childhood, and how we transformed the house into Himalaya, no? With you know, the stairs become with the stairs becoming, you know, kind of mountain with sheets over there, and looking for the yeti somewhere in the mansarda. So there's many different kind of places, but also other poems. There's a poem, for example, about a kind of vegetable that I hate, which is, I don't know, probably we're going to read it afterwards. Jonathan, which is a wonderful translator, told me he also hate barbabietola, which is, in English is beetroot. Well, I don't remember. Beetroot. So I also love to write poems which are really concrete insults. No? I insult this beetroot, and so on. So there's not only geographical places, of course.
Just another question to Sivan, because always talking about the connection between reality and imagination, I would like to ask you if you think that poetry can have any impact to daily life and to society and to the historical moments we live in right now. I think that we are all living critical times at the moment, and so yes, this is my question to you. What impact can have poetry, if any, on reality?
Well, as we all know, I think it was Auden who said poetry makes nothing happen, right? But so poetry makes nothing happen, but it can do one thing. It can keep a human soul alive. It can keep a human away from evil doing. It can keep a human away from going crazy. It can, I think, in these times, poetry can really heal your soul and or keep your soul safe somehow. Not because it's not about consonance. It's about conscience, yes. Right? It's a different thing. It can keep you somewhere within your moral stability. So it's never. I think it's never about the society as a whole, even if it's getting political, which it must at some point. Not necessarily directly, but still. But it's always about human, about keeping yourself human, about keeping your immediate environment human. Because in these times, our humanity is under attack in many different ways. And we have to use whatever we can to stay human, and art, including poetry, I think it's one of the means to do that.
Thank you so much, Sivan, and thank you so much, Federico, for this conversation. Now we are going back to listening to your poetic voices, and indeed we will hear two poems by Federico, Vilnius and Jerusalem, so once again, geography and cities. Read in Italian by Federico, and Sivan Baskin will read Vilnius in Hebrew. Jerusalem will be read in Hebrew by Jonathan Fine, who translated it, and Sivan Baskin will read Nova Kahokfuka and Anachnu Hazrei Hamoledet, we, the homeland mass. And but we also read Barbabietola.
Why not? What do you say, Jonathan?
No, we have
okay,
to.
Well, let's do it.
So, thank you, and let's hear your voices.
I'm very happy that you're going to read Vilnius in Hebrew. I've been there only one time, but I really waited for a long time to go there. And then I got this invitation to read my poems in Vilnius, and I was there with other poems from all over Europe. And I was fascinated, and I was so happy that my expectations were met. I really started to love even more Vilnius. So it's
like I was waiting for Rome
probably
for a long time.
So we have a couple of things that connect us incredibly, because we were reading this poem Kaplan by Sivan, and I wrote exactly in the same period also a kind of gazelle, which is called in Italian gazelle della pioggia, the gazelle of the rain, which has to do also with rain, with this kind of, last single words ending the verse. In my case, was under the rain. In your case, it's after the rain. But anyway, Vilnius. Ci sono nuvole, drappeggi e cupole barocche, e poi ci sono le tue labbra, perfette come l'ansa del Neiris che circonfluisce la città in una ringa inoppugnabile. Ci sono vie che si arrampicano dietro un'idea, e poi ci sono le sfumature mogano dei tuoi pensieri, timide ciocche tirate dietro le orecchie. Ci sono ciondoli, talismani e gioielli d'ambra, e poi ci sono i tuoi occhi, foreste eoceniche che sussultano nella spontaneità di un crepuscolo. Ci sono reti, ipomee e gerani su balconi, e poi ci sono le tue ginocchia che si arrossano nel dare gioia a chi è consunto, coniugando flessione e costanza. Ci sono rivoli, rogge e pozzanghere, e poi ci sono le tue gambe, un compasso che misura l'acqua celeste e la nostra prossimità ai diluvi. Ci sono prismi, caleidoscopi, biglie e diamanti, e poi ci sono le tue unghie, smaltate di trasparenza, su cui si riflettono le anime in tuo possesso prima di tornare al buio.
So thank you for writing a poem on my native city. I'll read it in Hebrew. It's translated by Jonathan Fine. וילנה. יש עננות, וילאות כתיפה בכיפות ברוקיות, ויש את השפתיים שלך, מושלמות ככימורי נהר נריס, שעוטף את העיר בנאום הגנה בלתי מנוצח. יש רחובות שמטפסים מבעד לידיה, ויש את גוני המהגוני של מחשבותייך, קבוצות מבוישות שנמשכו מאחורי האוזן. יש תליונים, קמאות ותכשיטי ענבר, ויש את העיניים שלך, יערות אוקיניים שנעורים בספונטניות של דמדומים. יש רשתות לפופיות סגולות וגרניום במרפסות, ויש את הברכיים שלך, שמסמיקות בעונג שהן מסבות, למי שתש כוחו מליישב כפיפה ויציבות. יש פלגי מים, תעלות וביצה, ויש את הירחיים שלך, מחוגה המודדת את משקעי התכלת, עד כמה קרבנו למבול. יש פריזמות, קליידוסקופים, גולות ויעלומים, ויש את הציפורניים שלך, משוחות בוהק שנשקפות בו, הנשמות השוכנות בקרבך, בטרם ישובו לאפלה. So the next poem I'll read of my own, it's not translated into Italian, is about the other war, the bigger war that is happening right now in Europe. It's called Nova Kakhovka. I remind you that in the summer of 2023, the Russians blew up a huge hydropower plant in Ukraine, and it caused a huge flood. Many people were killed, many ecological systems were damaged. So I wrote a lot of the Ukrainian war in the last 3 years. So Nova Kakhovka. מים, מים רבים, מים רבים שפורצים, מים רבים שפורצים מבעד לסכר, מים רבים שפורצים מבעד לסכר, מפוצץ מבפנים, בכמות דמיונית של חומר נפץ רשע. הם מים רבים, הם מים רבים שעוזבים את הטבע, את הריקוד הנצחי עם ענני הגשמים. שמי הנהר רוקדים מאז אותו יום שבו אלוהים הפריד בין מים למים. מים שפורצים מבעד לסכר מפוצץ מבפנים, הם כבר לא המים שאלוהים הפריד בין מים למים. הם כבר לא המים שנולדו באותו היום. הם כבר לא המים העליונים, לא המים התחתונים. הם עזבו את משפחת המים ופרצו מבעד לסכר המפוצץ מבפנים. חומר הנפץ הרשע מפרק את המבנה הנצחי, H2O, H2O, הם כבר לא, הם כבר לא. המים שבהם נוצרו החיים, זעירים, שבריריים, חד-תאיים, מקיאים מקרבם את המים שפרצו מבעד לסכר המפוצץ מבפנים. הם כבר לא יחזרו לעולם לזרום בעורקי הדניפרו הפצועים. הם לא יחזרו להתערבב עם גלי הים השחור. מים שהיו לרוצחים אינם יכולים לחזור. מים רבים שפורצים. מים רבים שפורצים מבעד לסכר. מים רבים שפורצים מבעד לסכר מפוצץ מבפנים. לא יתאדו אל העננים. לא יתאדו לעננים שברא אלוהים. הם יתאדו בגז חרדל הקרבי. הם יתאדו בציקלון המסומן באות בי. הם יתאדו בקרינה מהבלוק הרביעי, שם במעלה הנהר, לא רחוק, לא מכבר. 2 אטומי המימן ואחד של חמצן יצאו מהמים כמו מפלצות בגודל בבל ויוון. התגדלו והתקדשו, התגדלו והתקדשו, התגדלו והתקדשו ויצעדו בסך. יצעדו בכיוון צפון מזרח, בין אם תהיה שם עונה שכונה או עונה גשומה. נקמה, נקמה, נקמה. תל אביב, 16 ביוני 2023. And the last poem I will read, it's the poem we already mentioned, We the Homelandless, that gave its name to the whole book. So this is about the COVID times when we were stripped of the space and kept on only the time and the language with us. אנחנו חסרי המולדת. כשהים התיכון מצטמצם למילה קצרצרה בעברית, ומחוסר תנועה המרחב מתגלגל לתנוחה וברית, וכל ארץ זרה איבדה את הנוף והפכה לשפה טהורה, פעלים ושמות עצם וזמן שהומר לשירה. זה הזמן שבו אין מה לראות, הפסלים, הערים, האורות, יחכו לך לשווא בערים אחרות ותשרות את אורך רק מילה במקומו של איזה ורד רחוק. וצריך לאפסן את כל המפות עם כיתוב מיואש, לא למחוק. השפות מתייתמות מארצן, מאבדות את הארמי וגם את הפלוט, והופכות מחדש לניבים, כך כולן תהיינה שוות. ואנחנו חסרי המולדת, שוב נמיר אדמה במילה, געגוע, כללה, עלילה לא צלולה, גאולה. תל אביב, 3 באוקטובר 2020. Thank you.
I thought it is better to read now Barbabietola and then to end with a shorter poem, Jerusalem. So we start with this poem. This poem is dedicated to Jan Wagner, which is a German poet that I love very much, that translated into Italian. It was a kind of invitation also by him to write this poem, because we were traveling together, giving readings. I think it was exactly in Ukraine before the war, and we were invited to eat very traditional plate dish prepared with barbabietola, with I don't always remember. It's really a problem, because I'm trying to repress the rote beet. It was being German, beetroot. Okay, and I said, no, Jan, I cannot eat it. I really hate it. Why? What's the problem with it? And I told him the story, and he always asked me, why don't you write a poem about it? It's a wonderful thing. If you don't do it, I do it for you. Okay, I do it, and I ask him if I can put dedication to him, because it's like an insult. Because I tend to not dedicate poems, but he was very pleased, and so I wrote it. And young Wagner was sometimes also accused in Germany because he was one of the most important German-speaking poets at the moment, and he was accused in Germany to not write very specific, very detailed, very explicit political poetry. And he always said, and I very much agree with him, that there are some images in poetry which can be a vegetable, which can be a flower, even a tree or animal, which becomes like a very precise object of social critique. Poetry doesn't have to really speak about, war and disease and COVID and so on. For example, my poems were also written in the time of COVID, touching on the exact way that the subject is seen by journalists. So poetry is something else. So you can, use just an image and go through it. Barbabietola. La frutta cotta, le verdure lesse, il loro dolce ipocrita, gli agguati dell'amaro, i flosci frattali del cavolfiore, l'arancio spossato della carota, certo non erano prelibatezze, ma neppure incommestibili obrobri, nulla che inducesse nausea o batticuore, finché lei non mi si parò innanzi, nel refettorio azzurro delle suore, al terzo anno d'asilo, su un piatto di plastica bianca, sul riparo verde mare del mio tavolino, nella perfezione informica e pennarelli della mia innocenza, sussultando gelatinosamente, innervosito ammasso purpureo, scintillante, vibrante come oloturria in un acquario, grondante sangue, qualcosa di rosso, violaceo, un succo fucsia, mentre nelle narici si insinuava irrefrenabile un odore di terra e ferro. Passò un secolo, la forchetta in mano divenne forca, il braccio si irrigidì, divenne gesso, un castigo divino, indecifrabile, finché un dito indice, protesosi da una sagoma alle mie spalle, dalla nera manica di una suora, non mi lasciò scampo. La barbabietola, terrificante, luccicante cremisi, più vegeta di ogni cosa vivesse in quell'istante intorno a me, doveva entrarmi in bocca. E già solo nell'infilzarla, comprovando la resistenza ibrida e cruenta del suo corpo alieno, sentii che non avrei potuto reggerla, che dal fondo un singulto, un'atavica repulsione, il conato dopo un'ingiuria, l'avrebbe espulsa da ogni cellula, da qualunque mio concetto di bene, ma chiusi gli occhi e deglutii il più antico dei miei ricordi.
So you didn't like borscht. Should I read it in Hebrew or Jonathan?
I relate to the sentiment. סלק. הפרי המבושל, הירקות המורתחים, מתיקותם הצבועה, מלכודות המרירות, הפרקטלים הנרפים של הכרובית, הכתום העכור של הגזר. כל אלה לא היו מעדן ענין, כמובן, אבל גם לא זוועה בלתי אווירה, מעוררת כבס או הלמות לב. עד שהוא עמד מולי. בחדר האוכל הכחול של הנזירות, בשנתי השלישית בגן, על צלחת פלסטיק לבנה, על פני השטח הירוקים של שולחני הקטן, בשלמות הפורמייקה וסימני תומתי הפעוטה. התנשמות ג'לטינית, צביר סגול זועם ותזזיתי, נוצץ, רוטט, כמלפפון ים באקווריום, נוטף דם או משהו אדום, סגול מחריד, מיץ פוקסיה, ובנחיריי הצטבר בלתי נמנע, ריח ברזל ואדמה. חלפה מאה, המזלג הפך כלי משחית, הזרוע התקשחה בגבס, עונש שמימי בלתי מפוענח. אצבע מורה, מזדקרת בין צללי גלימת נזירות שחורה, לא נותנת לי להימלט. הסלק, מבעית בארגמניותו המבהיקה, חי יותר מכל דבר אחר סביבי שם. היה עליו להיכנס לפי. ועם נעיצת שן המזלג וגילוי התנגדותו ההיברידית של הגוף הזר המדמם, הרגשתי שלא אוכל לסבול זאת, שמקרבי עולה ענקה של דחייה קמאית. הבחילה שלאחר הביזיון ביקשה לגרש אותו מכל תא גוף, מכל תפיסה שלי את הטוב. אבל אני עצמתי עיניים ובלעתי את העתיק בזיכרונותיי.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I see that you also hate Beatrice. Love this kind of connections. No? You're the perfect translator into Hebrew for this poem. The last one, Jerusalem. Just very, very short, because when I was 12, it was the time where I normally would have had, a krizima at the church. My father, for the first time, told me, probably 150 years ago, you would have now have a kind of bar mitzvah. No? And he told me, your family is of Sephardic origins and so on. It was the first time that I knew that. Didn't have any idea of this kind of ancestors. And from this time on, I started to think, of course, about Jerusalem in another way. Every time that I heard the name Jerusalem, and when I came here in the last, the last time I was here was 2015, but I was many times in Jerusalem in the last 20 years, and of course, it grew in my heart very, very much. So in a day during COVID, it was probably the most, I don't know why, the most strong thought that I have and that I had. And this poem was written from himself, probably. Gerusalemme. A volte quando ti penso, Gerusalemme, sento un brivido percorrermi la schiena. Una nostalgia fortissima, che so sproporzionata ma che non posso arginare, che mi scioglie i muscoli e mi incendia le tempie, come se d'un tratto mi privassero dei sensi e sapessi che tutti i sapori, le gioie, i profumi li potrei ritrovare solo tra le tue pietre, le tue vie, in alcuni tuoi appartamenti. E mi ritrovo ad esaminare il mio nome, le sue concordanze negli archivi di rete, la sua storia di espulsioni, finzioni, sotterfugi. Per un periodo fosti l'indicativo presente del mio futuro, ora sei tra passato prossimo, biografia ipotetica, sogno perfetto, ottativo di visioni.
Hebrew? Yeah. ירושלים. לפעמים כשאני חושב עלייך ירושלים, צמרמורת פושטת בגבי, נוסטלגיה מופרזת, אני יודע, אך כזאת שאיני יודע לזכור, מרפה לי את השרירים ומבעירה את הרכות, כאילו כהרף עין, כהוא חושי, ואני יודע שאת כל הטעמים, הריחות ורגעי האושר לא אמצא, אלא בין חומותייך, בין סמטאותייך, בכמה דירות. והנה אני שוב חוקרת שמי, את הקונקורדנציות שלו בארכיונים מקוונים, היסטוריה של גירוש, מעשי נחלים וחתרנות. פעם היית הווה פשוט של עתידי, ועכשיו עבר רחוק מתמשך, ביוגרפיה היפותטית, חלום מושלם, חיזיון תלוי במשפט תנאי.
So thank you very much, Federico Italiano and Steven Beskin. Thank you all for being here. Just let me thank also my amazing team at the Italian Cultural Institute, Marina Trivella, Yonatan Tufik, and Sharon Hassan, who are here with us today. And now let's listen again to some music. So thank you all. And there is a reception after the music, so please stay with us.